Hi there, my name is Andrea, and this is High Literature, a program where I introduce books and comics and art to you, the viewer. Um, I don't have a lot of time left. I did a bunch of deleting, and I still only have 18 minutes, so this is going to be fast and furious. I will be getting back to books soon. I just finished Childhood by Tove Ditlevsen, and I am now on Youth. This is book 2 of the Copenhagen trilogy, and part 3 is Dependency. These are really hard to find, so I don't recommend doing so. You can get all 3 in one volume that was put out. Oh, time is just so weird to me now. It could have been 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So they are, it's not difficult to read these books, just not in this particular printing. But I highly recommend them. I will be sharing them after I finish rereading them. It's been a while. This is, I think, my 3rd time reading these. But the last time I read them, it was a long time ago, so I just want to refresh it for myself before I dive in with you guys. Michael Zulli died, major bummer, so I just went on eBay and just typed in his name and got whatever I could afford that pulled up that I wanted, and I got this. How cool. Isn't this beautiful? It's just so lovely. I love it. Such a beautiful painting. So this is Saga of the Swamp Thing. Published in 1987. Really? God. It's that old? Really? I can't believe it. I could have sworn this came out, I would have thought this was like 93, 94. But I guess not. I've always wanted to read Swamp Thing, but it's such a big, long story with just so many different moving parts, and I just didn't really know where to start. And so here I am. I'm finally reading Swamp Thing for the first time, and this was great. It is Alan Moore, Steve Bissette, and John Totalben. And I read this last week, I think, and it was wonderful. And I was texting with some friends because this has a foreword by Ramsey Campbell and an introduction by Alan Moore. And I never really noticed that before, something having both a foreword and an introduction. And it just got my little brain wondering, well, what's the difference between a foreword and an introduction? I didn't know. And after reading them, I decided that a foreword was like how a friend would describe you to somebody, and an introduction is the way a parent would describe you to somebody. And it was really funny because all the friends that I reached out to asking them, hey, without looking it up, what's the difference between, because, anybody can look it up, but I want to know, without looking it up, do you know, are you guessing? And everybody knew. I'm the only one who didn't know. But they all told me that an introduction is written by the author, and a foreword is written by somebody who's not tied to the story. So my guess actually wasn't too bad, with a foreword being the way a friend would describe you and an introduction being the way a parent would describe you. So even though I didn't know, I still gave myself a little pat on the back. And I really love a good foreword. I love good introductions. Some of my favorites are the ones written for David Lapham's Young Liars. I always tell people when I lend them out or when I get them to read them, to read, you would think naturally that you would read the foreword or the introduction or whatever before you read the story, but a lot of times I didn't. I would kind of save that for last, like it was like my final, like it was my, the last bite of a good meal. And Young Liars changed that. The introductions, the forewords, I can't remember what they were. They were forewords. Now I know, because I know what those are now. The forewords were so good that now I read them first. And so I'm going to read these to you now. So this is a foreword by Ramsey Campbell. It's raining in Washington tonight. Plump, warm summer rain that covers the sidewalks with leopard spots. Downtown, elderly ladies carry their houseplants out to set them on the fire escapes as if they were infirm relatives or boy kings. I didn't write that, but I would be happy to have done so. These are the opening lines of Alan Moore's first Swamp Thing story in this book, and I think they demonstrate that Moore needs no special pleading at all. Let me explain what I mean. Back in the late 60s, a change overtook many of the comic books on the shelves. Even familiar series became harsher, more cutting, more willing to take on reality in ways that, when the comics code was at its most suffocating, would have been unthinkable. Some of the loudest applause was mine. Still, when I look back now at some of the comics I praised, it seems to me that for all their seriousness about issues such as heroin addiction and racial intolerance, they weren't necessarily very well written. Too shrilly and melodramatic, perhaps, or too given to dull Hollywoodish preaching in the dialogue. Characters intoning lines that would be groaned off the screen in a movie. It's possible, as with the rock music of those years that used classical themes or was played from scores, that some of us, especially those like myself who hadn't previously been drawn to the field, tended to overrate what we found unexpected. I like that. But then again, without the progress made in those years, we might not have comics written by Alan Moore, in which case we would be a good deal poorer. In some ways, his merits are those of the finest tradition of comics. His ear for dialogue, his talent for concise, clear storytelling, his unerring sense of pace and timing. In other ways, he and his collaborators, Stephen Bissette and John Totleben, pretty well lead the field, especially in building a sense of terror. Yeah, this is a horror comic, and it was really, I was so curious, like, how is this going to read? Like, what's this going to be like? It's such a strange, unconventional story, and it's a horror comic. It's so spooky in the most bizarre, unique way. It's so good. You'll find a hint of this on the first page of the anatomy lesson, a promise gruesomely kept by the finale of the story. But it's the uncompromising radicalism of the anatomy lesson that announces most clearly this team is a force to be respected. There surely can't be many writers who, having taken over an established character, would begin by demonstrating in the autopsy scene that the character has never made sense as he was presented, and is in fact something far less human than even he himself believed. Yeah. Moore, Bissette, and Totleben take Swamp Thing apart in order to rebuild him. It's a moving and disturbing process, illuminated by the resurrection of a minor DC villain, the Floronic Man. Who's the Floronic Man? I'd never heard of this guy before. Somebody needs to make him a trading card to represent the dark side of identification with the vegetable kingdom. It's a moving and disturbing process illuminated by the resurrection of a minor DC villain, the Floronic Man, to represent the dark side of identification with the vegetable kingdom. That is a fascinating sentence. Swamp Thing's darker self. That's just, I love it. I love it. Jason Woodrow is all the more disconcerting for expressing genuine ecological concerns. He's more articulate than monsters usually are, since Frankenstein's anyway, though comic books are more prepared than most fiction to let their monsters have their say. He has given some of the best and most unsettling lines in a poignant farewell. If there's one thing I despise, it's the sound of steak sopping, he muses, and later sums up humanity as screaming meat, a phrase one could use to summarize splatter movies. Maybe they are the revenge of vegetables, and Woodrow seems to acknowledge this by wielding a chainsaw. Meanwhile, we're taking on a hallucinatory journey by Swamp Thing's changing consciousness. It's so fascinating. Introduced by the extraordinary image of Swamp Thing's face filling up with rain. Here I restrain myself from raving on about the visual inventiveness of the comic, preferring to let you discover that pleasure for yourself in your own time. But let me take the opportunity to celebrate Tatiana Wood's coloring, especially effective in the mental landscapes. Here, as elsewhere, Moore's language and imagery is simultaneously comic and horrifying, as in the way with horror fiction, right? Horror fiction at its best is in the business of pushing back the barriers, of risking the absurd in order to reach the sublime, just as Jason Woodrow does by eating a tuber of Swamp Things. By this stage, no reader can doubt that here is a story prepared to go to the end of itself, whatever it may find there or on the way. One troubling character it finds is Abby Arcane, still understandably suffering from all she went through, and not only in previous issues. One nightmarish childhood memory, powerfully depicted, seems to have no immediate narrative significance. Perhaps it stands for the horror that underlies the world of these stories and can break through at any time without warning. A world where one may buy a panel from a Francis Bacon crucifixion study as a poster, or be the life of the party by turning one's friends into zombies, or all the pupils at a school for autistic children may suddenly draw the same monster. But perhaps it also means that Abby has suffered enough to be able to reach the children. We can only hope. Having passed through the vegetable consciousness with his own skull playing Yorick to his Hamlet and getting the best lines, Swamp Thing is resurrected in an awesome full-page panel. From here on, the comic becomes what I would call a poetic reinvention of the superhero, not only Swamp Thing, but the Justice League, one of whom is brilliantly epitomized as a man who moves so fast that his life is an endless gallery of statues, and later Jack Kirby's Demon. God, that part was so weird. It seems to me that this creates a real problem in sustaining a tale of terror. After all, if the terror only needs a handy superhero to thump it into submission, we might as well not lose any sleep about it. But Alan Moore's terrors are too profound to be gotten rid of so easily. They are rooted deeper in the characters than a superhero can reach. Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson's Swamp Thing was a remarkable fusion of the superhero comic and the horror story, but I should like to claim even more for the new Swamp Thing. All I knew were the suburbs of fear, and now here I am in the big city. Indeed, the notion of the horror that can take the form of the victim's deepest fear is hardly new, but I have never seen a more terrifying image of it than the one that visits Jessica in A Time of Running. One test of art is that it is deeply felt, and can anyone doubt that this is? I believe that at its best, the new Swamp Thing can stand beside the finest works of contemporary horror fiction. I believe horror fiction is capable of encompassing a great range of human experience, comedy, tragedy, terror, and awe, and now it is beginning to do so. It is all the richer for, I don't know what that says, capital MESSRS, period, Moore, Bissett, and Totalbin. I'm sorry, I'm a dumb. I never went to college. Long may they continue to light up our darkest dreams. Very cool. I have not much time left. Can I read this in 4 minutes? I don't think so. Well, Moore's introduction is fantastic, and I will share it in another video. I want to show you. Oh, gosh. This is such a spooky, weird story. So this is when they find Swamp Thing and his face is filled with water. And it's kind of hard to tell what you're looking at. And then they show it a little more close up. Like you get kind of like this side view here in this panel. And the water's running down. And then you see it even more so here. And then there's like his eye glowing through. It's such a creepy, bizarre, sad, freaky, weird story. It's so good. And this is like the part where he's like playing like the York and Hamlet bit that Ramsey's talking about. It's so sad. And here's more of that. He's trying to... I don't know if I want to talk about it because I just don't know how I can do it without spoiling it. The art's so cool. I mean, look at that. Isn't that neat? And that. How neat. Now he's come back. It's such a beautiful story. Here's the Justice League trying to figure out what do we do about what's going on. Because it's crazy. Justice League is still just like, oh my God, what do we do? I don't know. Oh, isn't that beautiful? It's so cool. Well, seconds to go. I will bid you adieu. And, oh God, that part was so spooky. Yeah, I only have a few seconds left. All right, well, I was really hoping to read both the intro and the foreword, but time. So next time. All right, bye-bye.